My rich family disowned me, but a janitor changed everything. Imagine having everything: mansions, luxury cars, a future paved with gold. Now imagine throwing it all away for a principal. That was me. I was born into a family that treated wealth like a religion, and I was their prodigal child. But when I chose a life of purpose over a life of profit, they cast me out into the cold with nothing. I hit rock bottom, a ghost of my former self, starving and alone. But just when I thought all hope was lost, a guardian angel appeared. He wasn't a CEO or a long-lost relative. He was a silent, elderly janitor who held the key to not just my survival, but to the dark, twisted secrets my family had buried for decades. This is the story of how the man they paid to scrub their floors helped me wipe the slate clean and change everything. My world, for the first 22 years of my life, was a fortress of opulence. It was a life measured in thread counts for our sheets, in the horsepower of our cars, and in the hushed, reverent tones people used when they spoke my family's name, the Ashworths. My father, a titan of finance, built an empire on the backs of lesser men, or so he'd boast over glasses of $100 scotch. My mother curated our life like a museum exhibit, every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every social engagement a testament to our unassailable status. My older brother was being groomed as the heir apparent, a perfect, ruthless replica of my father. And then there was me, the anomaly, the disappointment. From a young age, I never felt the thrill of the stock market ticker or the satisfaction of a hostile takeover. Instead, I found my joy in the gritty, vibrant reality of the city just beyond our gated community. I volunteered at shelters, I taught art classes to underprivileged kids, I spent my summers building homes with Habitat for Humanity. To me, this was real wealth. To my family, it was a bizarre and concerning hobby. They saw it as a phase, a youthful rebellion that would surely be cured by a corner office and a 7-figure salary. The pressure was immense, a constant low hum of disapproval that followed me through the halls of our cavernous home. Dinner conversations were a minefield. My father would ask about my economics classes, and I'd try to steer the topic toward the social safety net, a concept he found laughably naive. My mother would sigh and remind me that no one would ever marry a woman who smelled of poverty and paint thinner. The breaking point came during my final semester of college. I had just been accepted into a prestigious nonprofit management program, a path that would lead me to a life of service, not riches. I thought, naively, that they would be proud of my accomplishment. I summoned the courage to announce it over what would become my last family dinner in that house. I remember the clinking of silverware abruptly stopping. My father didn't yell. His anger was always colder, more terrifying. He simply stared at me, his eyes like chips of ice. He explained, in a voice devoid of all emotion, that an Ashworth does not beg for a living. He called my chosen path a useless pursuit for bleeding hearts and an embarrassment to the family name. He gave me an ultimatum: drop the program, let him pull some strings to get me into a top investment bank, or be cut off. I looked at my mother, searching for a flicker of support, but found only a mask of cold disappointment. My brother smirked into his wine glass. In that moment, I realized I was utterly alone in that gilded cage. With a heart pounding a mixture of terror and resolve, I told them I would not be changing my mind. The words hung in the air, a death sentence for my life as I knew it. My father simply nodded, a curt, final gesture. He told me to pack a bag, that my credit cards would be frozen by morning, and that his presence in their home was no longer required. I was no longer his daughter. I was nothing. The transition from a silk-sheeted bed to a lumpy, secondhand mattress was a brutal awakening. The first few nights were the worst. The silence of my old, sprawling mansion was replaced by a symphony of the city, sirens, shouting, the constant rumble of the subway beneath my feet. My new apartment was a shoebox in a neighborhood my mother would have crossed the street to avoid. The walls were thin, the plumbing groaned like a dying animal, and the faint, ever-present smell of damp and garbage clung to everything. But it was mine. I had paid for the first month's rent with the last of the cash I had in my wallet, a paltry sum that had once been my emergency fund money for a single shopping spree. Survival became a full-time job. The nonprofit program was demanding, but it didn't pay the bills. So I joined the ranks of the invisible people, the ones my family had always looked through, never at. I was a waitress at a Greasy Spoon diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, my feet aching, my clothes permanently stained with the smell of fried eggs and coffee. Then I'd rush to a barista job until 10 at night, my hands raw from scrubbing milk steamer pitchers. On weekends, I picked up gig work, delivering groceries or assembling IKEA furniture for people who lived in apartments that, while smaller than my childhood home, still felt like palaces to me now. Hunger became a constant companion. I learned the art of making a single can of beans stretch into 2 meals. I discovered which grocery stores discounted their nearly expired food in the evenings and became a master of the "oops, I forgot my wallet" trick to get a free day-old bagel from a sympathetic cafe owner. It was a humbling, often humiliating existence. There were days, cold and rainy, when I'd walk past a high-end restaurant and see a family that looked like mine, laughing and warm inside, and a wave of homesickness so powerful it would almost bring me to my knees. But it wasn't home I missed. It was the comfort, the security, the simple feeling of being full and warm. I would quickly shake it off, reminding myself of the coldness in my father's eyes, the transactional nature of their love. This struggle, this grind was real. It was mine. And in a strange way, it felt more honest than the life I had left behind. I was determined to succeed, to prove them wrong. I excelled in my program, my professors praising my passion and my first-hand understanding of the struggles faced by the communities we aim to serve. But passion doesn't pay the landlord. One Tuesday, I came home to a bright orange eviction notice taped to my door. 3 days' rent or I was out. I had just paid my tuition installment, and my tips from the diner had been abysmal. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by textbooks on community organizing and social justice, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of despair. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was a fool's errand. I was exhausted, hungry, and now homeless. I had nothing left. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek, and surrendered to the feeling of complete and utter failure. I spent that night on a friend's couch, my eviction notice crumpled in my pocket like a death warrant. The next day, in a daze of defeat, I went back to my apartment building to collect the last of my things, my spirit broken. I was preparing to call my program director and see if I could get a deferment, a humiliating admission that I couldn't handle it. As I knelt on the floor, shoving clothes into a trash bag, I noticed it. Tucked halfway under my door was a plain white envelope. My first thought was that it was another late notice, a final kick while I was down. With a sigh, I tore it open. But inside wasn't a bill. It was a thick wad of cash, hundreds. My hands trembled as I counted it. $1,500. Exactly enough to cover the back rent and my security deposit, with a little left over for groceries. There was no note, no signature, nothing to indicate who it was from. My mind raced. Was it a mistake? A cruel prank? I looked up and down the empty hallway, my heart thudding with a mixture of fear and bewildered hope. I paid the landlord immediately, my hands shaking as I handed over the crumpled bills, and he, annoyed at not getting to throw me out, grudgingly tore up the notice. I was saved, but the mystery gnawed at me. For weeks, I was hyper-vigilant, watching every person who entered or left the building, suspicious of every kind smile. The money, a quiet miracle, had given me breathing room. I could focus on my studies and my jobs without the constant gnawing anxiety of eviction. Then, a month later, it happened again. Another plain white envelope, another thick stack of cash. This time, it was left on my doorstep inside a small paper bag. Along with the money was a brand new, very warm winter coat, my size exactly. The old one I had was threadbare, offering little protection against the encroaching winter chill. I was overwhelmed with a feeling so profound it was almost painful. Gratitude, yes, but also a deep, unsettling confusion. Who was this person? Why were they helping me? It felt too good to be true, and in my experience, things that were too good to be true usually came with a hidden price. The gifts continued, sporadically and without pattern. Sometimes it was cash. Other times it was a bag of high-quality groceries, the kind I used to take for granted. Fresh salmon, organic vegetables, artisan bread. Once it was a prepaid cell phone to replace the one I was about to get shut off for non-payment. My benefactor was a ghost, a silent, watchful presence in my life. They seemed to know exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. It was both comforting and deeply unsettling. I felt like a character in a strange fairy tale, looked after by an unseen force. The paranoia began to set in. I started to feel like I was being watched, not in a malicious way, but with a quiet, steady observation. I had to know. I had to unmask my guardian angel, not out of suspicion, but out of a desperate need to thank them, to understand the source of this incredible, life-altering kindness. Using a small portion of the gifted money, I bought a cheap, discreet nanny cam and aimed it at the peephole in my door. I set it to record whenever it detected motion. Then I waited. 3 days passed. The camera captured nothing but the comings and goings of my neighbors, the mailman, a stray cat that patrolled the hallway. I was beginning to think my mysterious benefactor was on to me, or perhaps they only came when I was gone for long periods. Then, on the 4th night, I got a notification on my new phone. Motion detected. My heart leaped into my throat. I was in the middle of a late-night study session at the library. I fumbled with the phone, my fingers clumsy with anticipation, and pulled up the live feed. The video quality was grainy, the angle skewed, but I could see the hallway outside my door clearly. An elderly man was standing there. He was stooped, his movements slow and deliberate. He was dressed in a faded gray uniform, the kind worn by maintenance or cleaning staff. He glanced up and down the hall, a gesture of practiced caution, before bending down. I watched, mesmerized, as he slid a familiar-looking white envelope under my door. He didn't knock. He didn't make a sound. He simply placed his offering and turned to walk away. As he shuffled down the dimly lit corridor, the camera caught his profile. And my breath caught in my chest. I knew that face. I couldn't place a name, but I knew I had seen it before. It was a face that was always in the background, a part of the scenery, someone so unassuming they were practically invisible. And then it hit me. He was a janitor from my father's company building, Ashworth Tower. I remembered him from the handful of times I had visited my father at his office over the years. He was always there, silently mopping the marble floors, polishing the brass railings, emptying the overflowing trash cans. He was just a fixture of the building, a piece of the human furniture. I had never spoken to him. I doubt my father or my brother even knew his name. To them, he was part of the help, a non-entity. Why on earth would this man, this quiet stranger from the heart of the empire that had cast me out, be helping me? The question echoed in my mind, a riddle with no answer. The next day, I was a bundle of nerves. I knew I had to confront him, but I had no idea what to say. Thank you for the secret cash donations seemed a bit blunt. I decided to go to Ashworth Tower, a place I had sworn I would never return to. It felt like entering the belly of the beast. The lobby was just as I remembered it, cold, imposing, and gleaming with an obscene amount of money. I took the elevator up, my stomach churning with each floor. I didn't go to my father's office. Instead, I went to the maintenance floor, a stark contrast to the opulence above. It was a maze of concrete corridors, humming with the sound of machinery. I found him in a small break room, sitting at a worn-out table, slowly eating a sandwich from a tinfoil wrapper. He looked up as I entered, his old, weary eyes showing no surprise.
He just nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting me. He gestured for me to sit down, his expression a mixture of sadness and something else, something like resignation. He knew why I was there, and he was ready to talk. The break room was small and smelled of bleach and stale coffee. The janitor, whose name I learned was Arthur, finished his sandwich in slow, deliberate bites. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me with an unnerving intensity, as if he was seeing right through to my soul. When he finally did speak,
his voice was a low, gravelly whisper, worn smooth by decades of disuse. He told me he had worked for Ashworth Industries for 42 years. He had started as a young man, and he had watched the company and my family grow from a successful business into a monstrous, greedy entity. He had watched me grow up, too. He remembered me as a little girl, bringing my drawings to show my father, only to be told that art didn't make money. He remembered me as a teenager, trying to talk to my parents about a fundraiser for a local shelter, and being dismissed as naive. He painted a picture of my family that was far uglier than the one I had lived in. He told me stories that made my blood run cold. He described how my father had systematically driven his own business partner, my father's best friend, to bankruptcy, seizing his shares for pennies on the dollar. He recounted how my mother had fired their long-time, loyal housekeeper of 30 years for breaking a cheap vase, a woman who had raised me as much as my own mother had. He spoke of my brother's casual cruelty, the way he treated waitstaff and service workers with a contempt that was learned at home. Arthur had seen it all. From his vantage point, invisible in the background, he had witnessed the slow rot of my family's soul, their humanity eroded by their relentless pursuit of wealth. He told me that my disownment was the final straw for him. He said it was the most purely evil thing he had ever seen my father do, casting out his own child for daring to have a conscience. He explained that he had a modest pension, a small house he owned outright, and no family to spend his money on. For years, he had been putting aside a little extra each month, a rainy day fund for a cause he believed in. When he saw the news of my expulsion from the family, he knew he had found his cause. He had used his connections in the building's maintenance department to find my new address. He had been watching over me, not in a creepy way, he assured me, but in a protective one. He would see me coming home late from my jobs, exhausted but still holding my head high, and it reminded him of the good person he knew I was, the one person in that family who hadn't been corrupted. He was disgusted by their greed, and helping me was his small, silent act of rebellion. It was his way of balancing the scales, of using the money he earned scrubbing their floors to support the values they had tried to stamp out of me. His story was incredible, a secret history of my life told from the perspective of a man who was always there but never seen. It was a testament to the fact that the people who hold the power are not always the ones who hold the truth. As his story wound down, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep, profound sadness. He said that his observations and his memories were just the words of an old man. But then he leaned in closer and told me that he had more than just stories. He had proof. Arthur's hand, gnarled with age and years of hard labor, slid across the worn Formica table. In his palm lay a small, tarnished brass key. It looked ancient, like something from a different era. He told me it was a master key to the old storage archives in the sub-basement of Ashworth Tower, a floor that had been largely forgotten after a major renovation decades ago. It was a place where old company records went to die, a dusty tomb of forgotten paperwork. He said that over his 42 years, he had seen things come and go from that floor. He had seen my father and his lawyers go down there late at night with boxes of documents and come back up with empty ones. He knew they were destroying evidence, burying the bodies of their dirty deals. But Arthur, as the unassuming janitor, had unlimited access. He had his own set of keys and his own intimate knowledge of the building's secrets. For years, he had made copies of anything he thought was incriminating. He didn't have a grand plan at first. He just had a deep-seated distrust of the people he worked for, and a gut feeling that one day their house of cards would come tumbling down. He had created his own archive, a parallel one, hidden behind a false wall in a forgotten storage locker. He told me he had ledgers detailing offshore accounts, shell corporations, and illegal campaign contributions. He had old files from the lawsuit with my father's former partner, documents that proved the fraud and intimidation he had used. He even had a few old VHS tapes from the building's security system, which he had meticulously transferred to digital files over the years, showing my father in clandestine meetings with people he shouldn't have been meeting with. He slid the key into my hand. It felt cold and heavy, weighted with the power to destroy my own family. He told me that everything was in that locker, organized and labeled. He said he was too old, too close to the end of his life to fight this battle himself. But I was young, I had a future, and I had a right to know the truth about the people who had cast me aside. He wasn't asking me to do anything specific with the information, he was just giving it to me. The choice, he said, was mine. I could walk away, burn the evidence, and continue to build my new life, free of them. Or I could use it and face the cataclysmic fallout that would surely follow. He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady, and told me that for the first time, the power was in my hands. He had spent his life cleaning up their messes. Now it was my turn to decide if I wanted to expose the filth for the world to see. I sat there, the key clutched in my palm, the weight of my family's entire legacy resting on my decision. I thought of my father's cold eyes, my mother's dismissive sigh, my brother's arrogant smirk. I thought of the people they had hurt, the lives they had ruined. And I thought of Arthur, the quiet janitor who had seen it all and had chosen to stand with me. In that moment, my decision was made. The call to my father was the most difficult and liberating thing I have ever done.
I didn't use my new phone. I used a payphone in a deserted bus station, a fittingly grim setting for the conversation. I didn't yell or accuse. I was calm, my voice steady and cold, mirroring the tone he had used with me on the night he disowned me. I told him I had a key. I told him about the sub-basement archive. I didn't need to list the contents. The sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told me he knew exactly what I was talking about. The silence that followed was thick with terror. For the first time in my life, I had power over him, and it was a sickening, intoxicating feeling. I didn't ask for money for myself. I didn't ask to be welcomed back into the family fold. That world was dead to me. Instead, I made him an offer. I told him he had 48 hours to liquidate a significant portion of his assets, $10 million, and wire it to a new foundation I was establishing. The Ashworth Foundation for Community Renewal, I called it. It would fund the very things he and my mother had always scorned: arts programs for inner-city youth, legal aid for the homeless, community organizers like the ones I was training to be. I told him that once the transfer was confirmed, Arthur and I would ensure the evidence disappear forever. If he refused, or if he tried to come after me, copies of everything would be sent to the IRS, the FBI, and the New York Times, all at the same time. He would lose not just his money, but his freedom and his reputation. He blustered, he threatened, he tried to bargain, but his voice was laced with a panic I had never heard before. He knew I had him cornered. 48 hours later, my lawyer called to confirm the transfer. It was real. $10 million, a king's ransom, was now mine to distribute. The first thing I did was set up a trust fund for Arthur, a generous one that would ensure he could retire in comfort and never have to work another day in his life. He protested, of course, but I insisted. It was the least I could do for the man who had saved me. With the rest of the money, I officially launched the foundation. I didn't take a huge salary. I took just enough to live comfortably, and I poured the rest back into the community, funding the projects I had only dreamed of before. My family never spoke to me again. There was a quiet, internal reshuffling at Ashworth Industries, a few news stories about strategic financial reallocations, but the public scandal never broke. I had kept my word. I had not destroyed them. I had simply forced them to pay a debt,
to use their ill-gotten gains for a purpose that was good. I was still the same person, pursuing the same useless career. But now I had the resources to make a real, tangible difference. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. I had a small, clean apartment, a fulfilling job running my foundation, and a clear conscience. The janitor didn't just give me money, he gave me back my future. He showed me that true wealth isn't about the size of your bank account, but the strength of your character. And in the end, that was a legacy my family could never take away from me.